If you want to win your fantasy league, you need to have the guys that come on down the stretch. Those guys who have the big games at the end of the season versus the guys who did it at the beginning of the season. I have identified more than 10 players who are either getting an increase in usage or saw a massive change in their role in week 11, who I think could potentially be some of the league winners for the 2025 fantasy season. Now, real quick, before I dive into the actual names, you're not going to hear players like Tetora McMillan, Sean Tucker, Michael Wilson, guys that had monster week 11 games, but I don't know if I can quite call them league winners because everybody has random big games from time to time. I'm not sure I am going to just buy back into this Panthers passing attack because Bryce Young randomly threw for almost 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. We know Marvin Harrison Jr. is not out for the season. He'll be back. He will be the number 1 wide receiver, and I hope Bucky Irving will be back at some point. So while those players certainly have value, especially in the short term, not sure if they're going to end up being long-term league winners here, especially in the fantasy playoffs. But the guys I am going to talk about, I do feel that way, and not just because they've seen an increase in their role or had a big week 11 game, but also because I believe in their role rest of the season, and I really love their playoff schedules. Now, before I dive into who those players are, I just want to say if you're enjoying this video or any of the videos we put out for you on a weekly basis, do me a quick favor. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. We would greatly appreciate it. And let's start at running back, and we have to start with rookie TreVeyon Henderson. This is it. I think we've seen it. I said on the live stream before the Thursday Night Football game, TreVeyon Henderson has the makings of a league winner to me, and nothing I saw on Thursday night changed my mind. You look at it over the last 2 games here where he's officially, supplanted and taken over this backfield. He ranks 6th among all running backs in expected fantasy points per game. He's played almost 87% of the snaps, handled 61% of the attempts, has ran 71% of the routes. He's been an absolute workhorse running back, but on top of that, he's actually been good. Over the last 2 games, he has 33 carries for 209 yards and 4 touchdowns while averaging 6.4 yards per carry, plus he's added another 6 catches for 34 yards and a touchdown. I don't even care about Ramondre Stevenson at this point. Like, what the Patriots have seen the last 2 games, they have to commit to this guy as the lead running back. Too much big play potential, too much explosive potential, and if they do, TreVeyon Henderson is absolutely going to finish the year as a league-winning running back, very similar to what we saw with Bucky Irving last year, because in the fantasy playoffs, he gets the Buffalo Bills, who have one of the worst run defenses, the Baltimore Ravens, who, sure, they've gotten better since the bye, but they're still not a shutdown run defense, and the New York Jets, who on paper are not terrible against the run, but we know that defense is not anything like it was earlier in the year with all the moves they made. Absolutely not a good defense here. TreVeyon Henderson should go off in every single one of these games, and he gives you exactly everything you want in a league-winning player. Pass catching, that explosive ability. This is what we want. This guy absolutely is going to win leagues this year. And Aaron Jones feels like it's still flying under the radar, but I do feel like this guy could be on a lot of championship teams in 2025. You look at it last week in week 11, he was 14th among all running backs in expected fantasy points with 16.7, played 66% of the snaps, handled 72% of the attempts, ran almost 50% of the routes, and had a 15% target share. That is a massive target share for a running back. Now, I know it was frustrating that Jordan Mason scored. Trust me, I don't think anybody was higher on Aaron Jones last week than me. Seeing Jordan Mason get that touchdown was very, very annoying, but remember, it came from far out. It wasn't like it was a goal line carry here. Aaron Jones is clearly the guy here in Minnesota. Jordan Mason barely involved. He had 6 touches last week. It's just lucky that one of them was a touchdown. I think Aaron Jones is certainly the guy you want in this backfield, and I think he's going to be a guy you want in your fantasy playoffs too, because he starts the playoffs versus Dallas and the New York Giants. Now, I know the Dallas defense has gotten a bit better with the trades, but I'm still not going to be scared of that matchup, and I am certainly not scared of the Giants. Now, he does finish Week 17 against the Lions. That is a tough spot here, but that is a game that could be an absolute high-scoring shootout. Plenty of touchdown upside there. I think Aaron Jones is going to dominate down the stretch here in fantasy. And I'm hesitant to go too all in on Kenneth Walker here, but we've now seen 2 of the last 3 games. He absolutely dominated here. You look at it in week 11, he played 50% of the snaps, handled 45% of the attempts, ran 35% of the routes, and had 16 expected fantasy points. But more importantly, he got all of the carries inside the 5-yard line, scored the touchdown, and he almost had a second touchdown. It was called back by a hold. So it looks like, again, like back in week 9, that he is the guy that they're finally committing to Kenneth Walker. Now, I do understand that back in week 9, when it looked like they were committing to him, we got back to an annoying split in week 10, and maybe we get back to an annoying split again. But this is now 2 of the last 3 games where he's clearly been ahead of Charbonnet, so I'm going to take a chance that this is now the norm. And if he is the guy when we get to the fantasy playoffs, he's going to go crazy in the fantasy playoffs. He gets the Colts in week 15. That's an easy matchup. Okay, the Rams, that is a tough matchup, but he just scored against them and had a nice game against them. And then the Panthers in week 17. Look, this guy has not, like, he's been bad this year. It's not like he's playing bad. They just have this annoying split. If they get rid of that annoying split, that is going to open the door for Kenneth Walker to be a league winner. I remember coming out of the bye, Liam Cohen, head coach of the Jaguars, was talking about, like, oh yeah, we're going to get our best players involved. We're going to get these guys more involved. And then we saw Bashal Tutin barely involved for the first 2 games. Well, we finally saw him involved here in week 11. You look at it, he played 31% of the snaps, handled 31% of the attempts, ran 16% of the routes, and had 8 expected fantasy points. Now, clearly, Travis Etienne is still the guy here, but remember, Bashal Tutin left that game with an ankle injury. You look at it in the first half, it was much closer. They had the same number of snaps. Bashal Tutin handled more of the attempts here. Now, Etienne's still the preferred pass-catching guy. For some reason, Bashal Tutin, even though that's kind of like his thing, did not get a single target there, but this was more of a 50-50 prior to that ankle injury. Now, at the time I'm recording this, I don't know the severity of the ankle injury. Doesn't sound serious. I'm going to hope it's not serious. Maybe he misses this week, but then hopefully he's back after that. Maybe he even plays this week. I really don't know. But as long as he's back for the fantasy playoffs, you probably want to have this guy on your team because he gets the Jets in week 15, which I already talked about. They've gone from a okay run defense to an absolutely horrific defense. Does get the Broncos in week 16. That is certainly a tough matchup there. Then he gets the Colts in week 17. That is totally fine here. And look, if anything happens to Travis Etienne, this guy's taking over the Jaguars backfield. This is a guy I definitely think needs to be on every fantasy roster right now. Another guy that needs to be on every single fantasy roster right now, even though he's not going to help you in week 12 because the Commanders are on a bye, is running back Chris Rodriguez. This is an absolute takeover by Chris Rodriguez. You look at it in week 11, 45% of the snaps, 45% of the attempts, 25% of the routes, 11.6 expected fantasy points. Corey Krosky-Merritt, only 26% of the snaps here, only 27% of the attempts, only 12% of the routes. Jeremy McNichols also barely played because this was a close game. They didn't need to really throw a lot. Chase Edmonds, he's just a special teamer. Don't worry about him here. This is Chris Rodriguez's backfield, and he's actually looked pretty good. Remember, this is a guy who was getting all sorts of hype in training camp. Him and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt were getting a lot of hype in training camp, and then for whatever reason, they decided, yeah, we don't even need this guy to be active. Then Eckler went down, and then they tried to commit to Bill, right? They tried to make Bill a thing, and he's like, nope, I'm not a thing. I just can't do it. And Chris Rodriguez the last 2 weeks has been really good, and why would they change what's working? And yes, he has a couple tough matchups coming out of the bye, but you're going to want this guy in your fantasy playoffs because he gets the Giants and the Cowboys in the fantasy playoffs. 2 great matchups. Now, he does have the Eagles in between there. That is a tough spot, in week 16 against the Eagles, but you're definitely going to want him in those Giants and Cowboys matchups. Pierre talked about him on the waiver wire video. He might still be out there on your waiver wire. If he is, go get Chris Rodriguez because he's absolutely trending up and could be a league winner in the playoffs. Now let's move on to wide receivers, starting with Christian Watson, the guy we've been talking about for weeks. Like, first Pierre said, hey, stash Christian Watson. And then the last couple weeks we're like, hey, pick up Christian Watson off the waiver wire. And then last week I was like, hey, start Christian Watson. He's in a great spot this week. And if you did, you're very happy because he was one of the few players that actually had a good game in week 11. But it's not just the fact that he had a good game, because again, lots of guys, Michael Wilson had a huge game. Ted McMillan had a huge game. I mean, Tyrell Shavers of the Bills had a big game. Like, that doesn't mean I'm like saying these guys are going to be worth having in fantasy. I mean, Ted's fine, but the other guys. But look at in week 11 here. He led the team in routes ran, a 17.2 ADOT. That's what we like here, those big plays. 28% of the air yards, second in target share at 19.2. 2 end zone targets. That's also what we like. Guys that can score touchdowns. And he led the team in first read percentage, which means he was the guy Jordan Love was looking to first on most of his reads. And assuming he can stay healthy from now to the end of the season, which is always, a big assumption for Christian Watson, he could absolutely go crazy in the playoffs. Now, sure, week 15, the Broncos. Surtain will probably be playing in that game. you may not want to start Christian Watson that week. Then he gets the Bears and the Ravens. Those are two absolute smash spots. And even against the Broncos, he at least always has touchdown upside, can always hit on that big play. Christian Watson looking like a league winner down the stretch right now. And again, if he is still on your waiver wire, he needs to be added. Now let's talk about the 49ers for a bit, because I think we really need to start taking Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall seriously heading down the stretch here. Obviously, we know Jauan Jennings has been the guy for the 49ers this year when he's been healthy. Nothing changed in week 11. He ran 77% of the routes, had a monstrous 32.2% air yard share, 19% target share right there, and 0.24 yards per route run. But look at Ricky Pearsall. He also ran the same number of routes. Now, he wasn't nearly as involved as Jauan Jennings, only a 7% target share right there with Demarcus Robinson. But remember, he was coming off a pretty serious knee injury. Got to think, he's going to get more and more involved in this offense. And what you got to love here for these guys is that Brock Purdy is back. And that's going to segue me into saying, if you need a quarterback, take a chance on Brock Purdy, who's still pretty readily available on a lot of waiver wires. Look at the big difference in the 49ers passing game with Brock Purdy versus Mac Jones. And look, Mac Jones was serviceable. Mac Jones did an admirable job filling in for Brock Purdy. But it's a totally different offense with Brock Purdy under center. With Brock Purdy this year, completion percentage over expectation, 8.6. Mac Jones just 5.2. But this is what I really like. Okay, ADOT's pretty close here, 7.4, 7.3. But look at the deep throw percentage, 11.5% to just 6.2%. Way more explosive plays with Brock Purdy than with Mac Jones. Mac Jones, more of a game manager type quarterback. Purdy will take more big shots, and that's what we want in fantasy. That's good for Jennings. It's good for Pearsall. And of course, they have a great schedule in the fantasy playoffs. They get the Titans, the Colts, and the Bears. Those are all terrible defenses against the pass. Jauan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, and Brock Purdy could absolutely smash in the fantasy playoffs. Look, Pearsall was probably dropped in a ton of leagues. Jennings may still be out there in some of your more shallow leagues. Same with Brock Purdy in a lot of your 1QB leagues. Go scoop these guys up if you can. And if you still have trades in your leagues, maybe go try to buy low. And outside of TreVeyon Henderson, I don't know if anybody's stock is going up faster than Jameson Williams right now. You look at the last two games since Dan Campbell took over as the play caller here. He's ran 89% of the routes, which leads the entire team. Has an 11.4 ADOT, which is second only to Isaac Tesla, who he hardly even plays. 35% air yard share, second only to Sun God. 18% target share, again, second only to Sun God, which is great because earlier in the season, he was like 12% target share, barely getting targeted, and a 19% first read percentage. They're manufacturing touches for this guy. They're getting him more involved in the offense, and he's had two big games in a row. We know this is what he can do. And assuming Dan Campbell does not give up play calling duties at any point, or even if he does, let's hope OC John Morton says, oh, this is how you use Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams gets a great playoff schedule. Rams, okay, they are a good defense, but they're not a good secondary. Steelers, Vikings. Vikings there in week 17 are a tough matchup against the pass. Like I said with Aaron Jones, though, this is in the dome. This could be a high-scoring shootout type of game. Jameson Williams has so much weekly upside. If he's going to get involved and used like this in this Lions offense, he's going to be the guy we expected to see when we drafted him this year. Look, it's probably too late for a lot of fantasy teams, but if you're still alive with Jameson Williams, he absolutely could be a league winner this year. And then a guy I thought could be a league winner this year, and he was far from a league winner so far, is Jakobi Meyers, now of the Jacksonville Jaguars. But maybe this is the opportunity he needed. Now, week 11, he didn't go nuts or anything, but we definitely saw a bump from week 10, his second week in this offense. Ran 75% of the routes, led the team in air yard share, almost 30%, led the team in target share at a very strong 27%, had a very strong 0.33 targets per route run. But what's interesting to me here is that he's running his routes 77% of the time out wide, because Parker Washington right now is a slot wide receiver, and we know Brian Thomas Jr. has been out. But if Brian Thomas Jr. comes back, I got to think they're going to move Jakobi more into the slot. I think that's going to be even more beneficial for Jakobi, because we know Trevor Lawrence has no problem targeting wide receivers out of the slot. And again, look at the schedule here. The Jets in week 15, that they don't even have a secondary anymore, really. Okay, the Broncos week 16, yes, we've already talked about it. This is a tough spot, but he could at least come through with a floor in that game. And then the Colts in week 17, another great spot here. They've given up a ton of points to wide receivers. Look, it might be too little too late if you have Jakobi Meyers. Totally understandable. But if it's not, Jakobi Meyers might end up helping you win a fantasy championship. And a couple tight ends real quick, because I know a lot of you are desperate at tight end. What about Brock Wright for the Detroit Lions? Sam Laporta shockingly got put on IR before the week 11 matchup here. And then after the game, Dan Campbell talking like, not sure we're going to see Sam Laporta this year. Like, didn't sound too optimistic here. We could be looking at Brock Wright rest of the season for the Lions. Now, he didn't do anything special in week 11. He only ran 56% of the routes, only had a 10% target share, only an 8% first read percentage. That was a game, miserable weather, right? Jared Goff on the road in Philly. They're going to get better here. And look, they need a tight end. They still are going to utilize a tight end. I'm not saying Brock Wright is going to be a one-for-one replacement for Sam Laporta. He's not. But again, if you're desperate at tight end, take a chance on Brock Wright. And again, talk about it. Great schedule here, especially for tight ends. Rams, Steelers, Vikings. The Vikings have not been strong versus tight ends necessarily. These are all three great matchups for a tight end. Look, Brock Wright isn't going to be, Brock Bowers or Trey McBride or anything like that, but he can be a serviceable tight end that gives you a high weekly floor. And if the rest of your lineup is already set and you just need that one more position, that could be the difference between winning or losing your championship. And then it finally might be time to fully buy into AJ Barner of the Seahawks. We've seen him have like instances this year where he's had like a big game, right? Whatever. But I really like the way he was used this week. He ran 82% of the routes, which was tied with Cooper Kupp for the second most. He also had the second highest target share here at 22.7%. This wasn't like one of those games where it's like, yeah, he scored a touchdown or he had a random big play. No, he was used in this offense. Now, I do think Shaheed will probably start to get more involved as the season goes on, but we've already seen AJ Barner be a part of this offense. Why can't he continue to be a part of this offense? And look, I know the last 2 weeks have not been great for Sam Darnold here, but he was so good earlier in the season. He's had a couple tough matchups. He's going to get better. I think we're going to see the better Sam Darnold here down the stretch. And again, AJ Barner has a fantastic schedule for our tight ends. The Colts, the Rams, the Panthers. The Rams are a good defense, but they have struggled against tight ends this year. These are three great spots for AJ Barner. Again, if you're in deeper leagues and you need tight end help, AJ Barner just might be your guy. Now, of course, I'm sure you need help for your fantasy matchup in Week 11. Don't worry, we got you covered. Everything you're going to need to win and dominate, you can find it in our playlist right here.